Hey guys, welcome back. It has been a long couple of months and you guys haven't seen me much on YouTube, and there's a reason for that. We've been traveling. The last time you saw me, I was home for about a week. We were trying to figure out what to do with our car situation because we had blown our transmission filming our documentary that we're coming out with on bison. So we figured a solution out. I mean, sometimes you just have to finance things, but you know, the reality is that, you know, we had a job to do, and I remember from the very beginning of this job, my wife looking at one of the sponsors saying, you know, you want to sponsor this because one way or another we're getting this done. And I think that that's missing from society today, is that a lot of people, when things get too hard, they just stop dead in their tracks and they don't do anything about it. You know, if things get too hard for people, it's like we're programmed to just say, oh, it's too hard, I'm not going to do that again. You know, in our situation, our family car for 10 years blew its transmission out. We couldn't afford a new car. We eventually found a way to get ourselves into a new vehicle. I turned around, went right back on the road because I had to get back up to Canada, which is about a 39-hour drive from our house. Made it to Cincinnati, the exact same place where the transmission in our last car blew out, and that transmission overheated. Luckily had a warranty, so I dropped it off at a dealership, rented a car, drove 30 hours in 2 days to make it to a meeting the next morning. Went to the meeting, everything was great, went back to a hotel and just collapsed. And to make matters worse on that trip, my son was flying out to a summer camp, and I had planned to drop him off in an airport a long route. And with all the storms that we've had on the East Coast due to El Nino this year, his flight was canceled. So then he had to drive with me 9 hours to my next stop, and we tried flying him out again. Eventually we got him on a flight. Of course, that flight got delayed, got redirected. So it was just a fiasco. But it made me think about it. You know, when people run into situations today, they just give up and they say, oh, it's too hard, I don't want to move forward with this, or they complain about it. And there's nothing wrong with complaining about it. I called my good friend Ron Miskin with the Buffalo Wool Company and filled his ear about all the thoughts going through my head, because I know that he understands me, and I feel comfortable doing that, but I don't want to just lay it all out to the world like some people do. But that's the society we live in today, is that people will just filter it out to the world, give up and not move on. And I think, you know, part of it is that we've been programmed that way because they want you to give up. The more that people give up on things, the more dependent they become on government systems, and the more control that people have over them. Could you imagine if we had a society of people who never gave up when things got hard? Anyway, point of the story is, don't give up when things get hard. I don't understand why people do that. It wasn't the way that I was raised, but I can see how it's becoming an issue today, and I think it's just programmed in. Our young people, they don't think, you know, the same way even my generation did. My generation is actually a bit of an outcast from even my parents' generation. And so when you kind of go back through the times, you know, and you go back to the times of like the Great Depression, which, believe it or not, I do think that we're heading in that direction. There are some things that have just held on by a strand, and it cracks me up because I don't think that people realize how fragile the system is right now. But eventually that strand is not going to be able to hold on anymore. The way they've finagled things over the last couple of years has been scary. It's been scary to watch, and even the tools in the tool bag are running out. And when they do, things are going to get a little crazy, because people have been put into this mindset and these positions of just giving up when things get bad, and letting their frustrations out like an uncontrolled populace of people. I mean, you saw it recently in New York City with the game console giveaway. I mean, thousands of these young people showed up for these game consoles to be given to them, and it turned into a riot over game consoles. But this is what people today care about. They care about, you know, things like free game giveaways. They don't care about going and working hard for a job. They care about how many hours off they're going to get, whether or not they can work from the luxury of their home. There's actually a study that just came out that said that people who work from home have an 18% decrease in productivity. Now, I don't think that is fair to say for everybody. I'm sure that's like a general thing. There's probably about 50% of the people out there who lose 50% of productivity the second they work from home in their pajamas. And there are some people out there who probably actually increase in productivity. But point is, you know, things are different now than they used to be. People can give up. They can give up. They can jump on some programs. They can, in so many words, stink at life and get by comfortably. And that is how they want us to be. Anyway, I wanted to talk about something on here. And there are a lot of things to catch up on, believe me. When you're traveling for 3 months and you look back at what's going on in the US, holy schmoly, right? There's a lot going on. And there's a lot going on with food productivity. Beef prices are about to go through the roof. Rice prices just went through the roof. I mean, we haven't seen the prices of rice as high as they are right now since 2008. You've seen the wheat prices and corn prices come back and stabilize a little bit, but they've been holding on to their current levels, which is about a 30-40% Fibonacci, and I think that it's going to go a lot higher. So we'll do some videos that catch up a little bit on what's going on globally with food prices, because there's a lot going on. There are a lot of things that are going to impact your grocery bills in the future, and that's something we've always talked about on this channel. But aside from all the chaos and food prices, what I wanted to talk about was sending kids back to school, because I'm not sending my kids back to school. And I don't want to sound like one of those parents that end up on the FBI's most wanted list because they disagree with the indoctrination of our children the way that it has been with political bias. And all this stuff is political bias. I mean, when you look at a lot of the curriculum that goes through the schools, it's always been political bias. And for that to be news to people is surprising to me. And when I was in college, which was a long time ago, I actually was in a debate class where we debated a lot of government topics. And the debate that I won was on public schooling and whether or not public schooling was a good thing or not. And going way back to the very foundations of the public school system in the United States, it was designed for conformality. So they wanted people to conform to society. And a lot of people think this had to do with Native Americans because a lot of them were thrown into schools. But it actually started with Irish immigrants because they were out of control. And so they started the public school system, throwing people's kids into it to help them conform to society and become better U.S. citizens. That carried over to indigenous groups, it carried over to a lot of different things. There was a time in the 1800s when they literally went to people's homes at gunpoint and made them send their kids to school. They couldn't stay at home and work on the farm. So school, the public school system has always been about conformity. I mean, from the very beginning. I mean, it's always been about educating people to think like the masses. And thinking like the masses has always been probably the largest threat to democracy worldwide. When you have a mass population of people thinking the same way, without individual thought, without individuality, that destroys democracy. And we've seen it in the United States. We've seen it, we've got the right, the left, both mass thinkers. Nobody is able to think for themselves. They belong on one side or the other. And it's destroyed democracy. We have no independent thinkers out there anymore. I mean, I'm not saying that you're not an independent thinker. I'm sure there are some. But for the most part, people cannot think on their own. So when we talk about, you know, why I don't send my kids to school and some of those issues, I do agree with those issues. I do think that the public school system is designed for conformity and mass thinking. And I don't agree with that you've never had a genius come out of that situation. So if you're going from a pure educational standpoint, nobody that has ever done anything special has ever thought with the masses. or been a part of the masses. They've always been what we consider an outcast, or what kids would be labeled as having a learning disability today. They've always been the people who are on the outside of the masses that come up with genius ideas. And they're genius ideas because they're different than everybody else's ideas, and they usually contribute significantly to society. So, one of the main things that I think of when I think of public school systems and educating your kids outside of them is that if you want your children to stand out above the crowd, if you want your children to be able to do something different, do something special, you're definitely hindering their ability to do that by putting them in public schools. The other thing, though, for me, is the amount of distractions today. We have a lot of distractions. Just look at the Biden and Trump sagas that keep going on with all of the the legal conflicts between both of those people. And let's put it this way: we've put a lot of people in office that probably shouldn't have been there, and people will disagree with me when it comes to Trump. And I think that Trump, played a role at the time that he was in office. That was a good role. I also think that there's a point in time when people need to move on and bring in something that is different. I think that the Biden family has always been a criminal enterprise, and it surprises me that people are surprised by some of the news and still in denial of some of the things that come out. We've all known this stuff for a long period of time, but yet it still, astonishes people when they hear a piece of evidence that they didn't think was true about that family. Well, it's true. The laptop was real. Anyway, that's just one of the distractions. Then you've got all these other distractions with these different movements that are out there. And I'm not going to get into detail on those movements. I think we all kind of feel the same way about them. And what's funny is that these are political movements, okay? Most of these movements, if you follow the funding from protests back in, I'll just call them protests back in 2019, you follow the funding trail of where that went into the next movement, and then you follow the money mover behind all of that, which is a large foundation out in California, then it starts to point the dots back to this is a political movement. And what's funny about it is the Democrats really embrace this movement, but it actually has traditionally nothing to do with their party. So it's an interesting thing to watch, but those political movements are distractions. They're distractions, and they're distractions to the point that have reached ridiculousness. I mean, even people who are within certain parties who fall into these movements, and there are movements on the right side as well, they start to look at it after a while and go, oh my gosh, this is getting a little bit crazy here. It's gone too far, too far on both sides. So there are a lot of distractions out there, and I think that, in my opinion, those distractions are on purpose. And it's hard to tell that to somebody who is moved by any of those distractions, and it's hard to tell that to anybody who tries to ignore them. To tell people that they're being distracted on purpose, everybody wants to know why. There's not necessarily an exact reason that I can pinpoint as to why we would be being distracted, but it's pretty clear to me that when things get as crazy as they have been, they are distractions. And I don't want to put my kids into that situation. I don't want my kids, and I don't want my family distracted with that stuff, because distractions keep you from thinking clearly. They keep you from thinking like an independent individual. Maybe that's the reason why. Maybe we're not supposed to think independently. That's what the entire school system is about. I also don't think that it's necessary to expose kids to half the things that they're exposing them to these days. It's very confusing, especially for children who haven't completely matured. We'll put it that way. But the overall main reason why I'm not going to send my kids back to school now is because the school system, to be frank, sucks. It really does. It is a horrible education system. I don't know what they have done over the years, but any form of reality when it comes to learning in the public school system seems to be flawed. If you look at there was a study done on 13-year-olds over the past year or two since COVID, and the number of 13-year-olds, it's more than 50% are flunking at their grade level. They're not meeting the expectations of their grade level. And I have a 13-year-old, And so looking at those statistics is not surprising to me. I could tell you exactly what happened. When COVID hit at a time when students at that age group were going through some important learning processes. They were moving into more advanced reading, more advanced mathematics. They were moving into more advancement, and then we shut down the school systems and sent everybody home. Now, a lot of people who were in favor of sending kids back to school right away, and I understand that. You have to get back to work, you have to do things, but you have to think about what you're in favor of sending your kids back to. The second they came home, you had an opportunity. Most of us, including myself, went forward with the Google Classroom, educating our students through Google and online teachers. Well, that method was an ultimate failure. It didn't work. I mean, Google's Classroom was horrible. Nobody paid attention. They were distracted. You had to stand over your child's shoulder. You might as well be teaching them yourself, right? But so we went through that process, and then they all went back to school, and they went back to school with the laptops. They never came back off the laptops. Once they got them on the laptops, they never took them off. So you got 32 kids sitting in a classroom, and how are you supposed to know what each of those kids are doing? Are they paying attention to what you're writing on the chalkboard? No, because they're looking at their computer screen. Well, what's on their computer screen? As a teacher, you see the backside of the computer screen. So most of these kids have just been distracted. And this form of computer education, it used to be at the high school level. Now it's at the middle school level and elementary school levels. And it's a waste of time, really. I mean, you're sending your kids to a daycare and they're not learning a dang thing. And that's the reality of where our school system is today. All of this technology in the classroom has completely clouded the ability to properly educate children. I don't blame the teachers one bit, because they're not the ones who are coming up with the curriculum. It's the school system that is. So when you add that together with all the distracting curriculums, all of the curriculums that I fundamentally disagree that any child should be exposed to, it doesn't make any logical sense to send your kids to school. And that's all above and beyond the whole fact that school systems, the public school system, was designed for mass thinking. And mass thinking is, in of itself, the greatest threat to global democracy. You don't want to think like the masses. We need individuals, independents, people who can think for themselves. I can tell you from educating our 13-year-old at home that he tests actually above 60% of public school children in a lot of areas. There are some areas we're still catching him up on, but he is doing phenomenally well by doing homeschool education. A lot of people think, well, if you homeschool a child, are they getting social interactions properly? I mean, that's part of the school system, is they need that social interaction. I'm going to be frank with you real quick. Normally, when you take somebody and you set them in a social setting where they don't want to be with a bunch of other kids who are there but don't necessarily want to be there. I mean, there are some kids who love it in that situation, which is fine by me. They can love it all they want to. But most of those kids don't want to be there. They have no shared interests. They're forced to sit next to each other in a classroom. They're forced to socialize. What you're actually doing is you're putting your child in an awkward social environment. And then we wonder why there are so many people out there today that are socially awkward. It's because we've been forcing them into this environment. They don't learn how to naturally socialize and naturally build friendships and relationships with people that have similar interests to them. So, with our kids, what we do is we enroll them in things they're interested in. Boy Scouts, which I guess now is Scouts because it's a different subject. So we enroll them in Scouts. We enroll them in sports programs. We send them to summer camps where they get to hang out with cabin mates and enjoy outdoor life experiences. And the thing is all those kids are going to those activities because they have interests in that activity. So immediately when your child walks into that group of children, they have a shared interest that brought them to that experience. And it's, just simply because they're kids, a lot of them don't have an interest in going to school. Like I said, they don't want to be there. So you're starting off that integration with an awkwardness. That awkwardness is going to carry over as they build relationships. And it's not a good way to teach kids how to build social relationships with people. End of story. So we send our kids to extracurricular activities. We find them ways to find friends, and then we foster those friendships. And that, to me, is much more important when it comes to learning how to be social, learning how to socialize with others. They develop a comfort zone within themselves that they can take to other experiences when the time permits. And so this is like one of those early developmental things that is extremely important, and the school system totally wrecks. A lot of people also question me about, traveling. So our youngest travels with us and homeschools with us on the road. And the biggest thing I get is, well, he probably has a lot of street smarts from traveling because he's been to a lot of places. He's been to several countries. He's been, kind of all over the United States. He's been to almost every national park out west. I mean, the kid has been everywhere. He's passed every junior ranger program in every park. And they're like, well, so this makes him, street smart and makes him knowledgeable of areas, but how does that make him, book smart? How is that helping him with his curriculum? Well, he can read better than most kindergartners. He can do a lot of things. He can do his math correctly. I mean, there are things that he tests out of way above other children. And even the things that he doesn't test way above, he's at least testing, above average. So, when it comes to homeschooling and traveling and educating your kids, in my perspective, sometimes that travel is the largest educational experience, because here you are, you're putting them in different environments where they're going to have an interest in something. They're going to pick up on something, and they're going to take interest in it. Like when we were in Montana, there are a lot of fossils and dinosaur museums, so he got interested in that. When we were in Yellowstone, there's a lot of, biology and different things going on, so he got interested in that. The kid could tell you more about Yellowstone National Park than most adults could. At the end of the day, I think that our kids are going to learn best by introducing them into situations where they find an interest, they run with that, and as an educator, you feed that, you fuel it, and you give them the education materials at the time of their interest level. At school, it's kind of the opposite. You're fighting that bar. You're trying to make them interested in the subject to move them forward with a class of 32 students to make them hit a goal by the end of the year. If you're self-educating, if you're educating, with your child, you can help them get to that goal by the end of the year in your own way. I mean, sometimes, you have to pick up a few things that you wouldn't have normally picked up that just are part of the curriculum. But most of that, 90% of that curriculum, they're going to end up asking you about. They're going to end up asking you about it because the curriculum is designed for their age group and their curiosity levels. And they learn so much better. They retain so much more of it. So when it comes to homeschooling and giving your kids those experiences and having the ability to do that, you're going to be raising brilliant minds that aren't distracted by some of the craziness in the world today. Somebody even said to me the other day, I can't believe that person, as smart as they are, their IQ level, when they were a kid, has bought into some of the things that they've bought into. It's plain out ridiculous. But it's the public education system. It is a brainwashing system. It is dumbing people down. And whether it's on purpose or just simply by design, I would argue both. It's on purpose and by design. And that's because of going back to the original structure of the public school system, what it was meant to do and what it is used for today. I mean, there is no question in my mind that it's being used for conformity and mass thinking. So again, I will not be sending my kids back to school this year. And it has, a little bit to do with the distractions, a little bit to do with the curriculums that I disagree with. Another main point that I have in all of this is kind of some of the legal fiascos you've had over the last couple of years. You see this especially up in Canada in some places, and you hear about it here in the United States. But students are getting rights away from their parents, like going to a guidance counselor and having discussions. You don't necessarily agree fundamentally with what those counselors are telling your children or how they're guiding them. I can tell you most of you will not agree with how they're guiding them. And there are some states where they are legally protected from from sharing that information with you as a parent. There are states like North Carolina has been working on a Bill of Rights, Parents' Bill of Rights. As parents, we should have a right to know everything that goes on with our kids. But the public school system, for whatever reason, and in a lot of areas, has felt that they have rights to your kids above your rights. And there's a problem with that for me. There's a problem for me with all this ADHD testing and drugs that they try and put kids on today because they're different. They think outside the box. They don't conform to the way that the rest of the kids learn. If you looked at everybody independently as an individual, nobody actually conforms. I mean, we all would have a learning disability at some point. And as their parent, you don't have to have medication. You don't have to go that route because you know your kid better than anybody else. So if you're educating them at home and you know their personality, you know what interests them, you know your kid, right? I mean, you've raised them. Hopefully, some people don't know their kids, but for the most part, most of you know your kid. There's nobody better in the world to educate them and help them learn the way that they learn best and give them the tools that they need to succeed than you. I mean, you could do a much better job than any pill could do. So anyway, I just wanted to go on this little rant because I hear it all the time. Why aren't you sending your kids back to school? And a lot of times, it could turn very political very quickly, especially if the focus is on those distractions. And no, I don't want my kids even in learning about some of the things that they're trying to teach them these days in school. But there are a lot of distractions. There are a lot of distractions when it comes to science and the climate, to medicine, to sexuality, there's just so many distractions that a lot of these kids aren't even given the opportunity to grow into themselves, to understand themselves, know who they actually are before they're told to identify themselves. It's like asking a kid, do you remember when people used to ask you in elementary school what you wanted to be when you grew up? And it was a fun question. It was a fun question, but nobody actually knew. And how many of you actually became what you said you wanted to be at that age? Right? I mean, so there's a lot of distractions. There's a lot of things that I disagree with, but that's not my main reason. My main reason is, number one, I completely disagree with mass thinking. I completely disagree, therefore, with mass education. I value individuality. I value independence. I value those things. Those things are what make us a democracy and what have made the world succeed over the years. If everybody thought the same, we would have imploded a long time ago. Educating at home, the test scores prove it. The kids are learning more because they're learning in their own time. They're learning in a comfortable environment, and they feel free to ask questions. They feel free to explore subjects, to branch out. And that's really important when it comes to education. You can't get that in a classroom. Ask your kids if they feel comfortable asking questions in the classroom. And I guarantee you on most of your home reports, they're going to be like, doesn't ask enough questions because they don't feel comfortable. It's not a good environment for them to feel comfortable. Why would they? Social interactions, and apparently, and the thing is this does take parenting. I mean, for a lot of people today, they're not parents, right? But most of you are parents. So let's stick with that. Okay. So, that's the other thing is, social interactions. You have to take your kids out to interact socially. But you figure out what their interests are, you put them in an environment with other kids that have those shared interests, and well, bam, you have a kid that learns how to socialize. Put them in a school environment where it's awkward to begin with, bam, you have a kid that's socially awkward. So anyway, I hope that some of you think about those things this year, and I know that it can be tough because that means that somebody's got to stay home and educate, or you have to take turns staying home and educating. And with our older kids, I teach a couple subjects. My wife teaches a couple subjects, though she handles a lot of the younger kids' curriculum. It is a change of lifestyle. But at this point in time, when you look at all the crazy distractions going on in the world, when you look at just things that are happening, and I don't need to go into a list of it, y'all know what they are, right? There comes to be a point when you have to ask yourself, is going back to a traditional setting of a home life important? Is it important to my family? Is it important to the future of my family? And I think that it is. We have found a way to stay together as a family unit for work, for education, for all the things that we do. And what I have seen is it's created an incredible bond with us and our kids, and it's created opportunities for our family that we never thought we would have had before. It does take some adjusting to the finances. You know, when your car blows a transmission, you got to get a new one. That could be a little more difficult to figure out, but there are ways to figure it out, and everybody's situation is going to be different in how they overcome those challenges. But there are ways to make adjustments and figure it out. And if you do it correctly, and you figure out how to supplement your income by doing things on your own, like growing food, that's a perfect way to change your income situation right now. Because if you can grow your own food, I mean, look at your grocery bills, and they're only going to go higher. Different video. But if you could figure out a way to do it, you could save your kids. And when I say save your kids, I mean it. I mean, at this point in time, sending them to the public education system, putting them in those environments is destroying them.